Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining Online Fundraising 101. Here we are toward the beginning of March 2025, and it is kind of a tough environment for a lot of nonprofits and political groups. Foundations that have been funding projects for years have been pulling back. Individual nonprofits are often having trouble raising grassroots money. Many of the big Democratic donors are burned out and turned off after last year. So, for a lot of organizations, this is a time to really sit back and think about fundraising, how they've approached it, what they need to do now, what's working now. So, I want to take a journey into the digital fundraising world, try to bust a few myths and misconceptions, talk about some good practices, talk about things that we've seen working out in the real world, and really talk about why people give money and how we can practically and effectively encourage them to give more money. So I'm your host. I'm Colin Delany. I have been in the digital politics world for a long time now. I've been in digital politics since the late 90s. I've been in politics since the beginning of the 90s. I was a member or worked for a member of the Texas legislature starting right after college when I was a very young man and a little wet behind the ears. I really do encourage any of you, if you ever have a chance to work in a state legislator or a city council member or a mayor's office, I think you learn an enormous amount about how politics actually affects people's lives in the real world. Just doing constituent work taught me a whole lot. Um, and it's given me a pragmatic approach to digital politics and advocacy, which I think comes through in this presentation and really in every training I ever do. This is the third in a series of six so far trainings. If you want to keep up with me, you can follow me on the socials. I also have my Substack address down there. I've been running ePolitics since 2006. I did take a bit of a break during the pandemic, but we're rolling again, both at epolitics.com and at the Substack. There's the cover of the 2021 edition of my ebook. The 2024 edition is on epolitics.com and in the Kindle store, and I hope to get the 2025 edition out in the next month or two. Oh, and I also play bass in a kick-ass rock and roll band in Mount Pleasant, DC. So I've been, like I said, I've been working in the digital side of the political world since the late 90s. So I've been able to grow up with the technology, really, back when it was just email and websites to nowadays when it's short video, social media, influencer marketing, etc. But I do digital ads, strategy and placement. I help organizations with top level digital strategy, helping an organization figure out how to get to where they want to go from where they are. Program audits, email strategy, list building, social media strategy, and then I run all kinds of campaigns and digital projects. So if you'd like to chat, drop me a line. So like I said, I got started in Texas politics, where politics is played as a contact sport. So you walk out of that experience with few illusions about human behavior. So let's talk about human behavior in terms of digital fundraising. And just a reminder that if you have questions or observations, please leave them in the chat. And I really encourage y'all to answer each other's questions too, because collectively we are going to know a whole lot more than I will on my own. So, what works? Well, going back to the beginning of fundraising, there are a few things that tend to work better than anything else. And the first of these is emotion, right? That most people give to an organization or a campaign because of something they feel in that moment. Now, there are times when, donations are more kind of coldly thought out. For instance, for nonprofits at the year end, there are people who are going to be basically planning their tax strategies and, deciding how much money they're going to give based on, relatively cold financial questions. But at the same time, you want to be the thing that they choose to spend the money on, right? And that usually means grabbing at the heart, right? Rather than some kind of cold logical appeal. Now, for some organizations, a cold logical appeal may be perfectly valid, right? It may work just fine. But for most of us, I've worked for some pretty wonky policy organizations before, and sometimes their wonky content actually does well. But for most of us, it's going to be the heartstrings, right? I did years ago, I helped out with year-end fundraising for PetSmart charities. And I tell you, when you get to work with cute puppies and kittens, it's tough to beat. Also, I worked with Save the Children Action Network on a list building exercise a few years ago. And again, pictures of cute kids, but faces, right? Faces and photos, things that create this emotional connection, but also timeliness, right? Striking when the iron is hot. Now, we're going to talk about narrative arcs and pre-planned fundraising, series of messages, series of asks. But you got to be prepared to drop all of that if something happens in the moment, right? So these days, it may be that one of your important issues or one of your important constituencies is about to lose benefits or is otherwise under attack. You might have had a series of fundraising messages ready based on a different topic, but you got to strike while the iron's hot. So get the appeal out there while people are noticing and while they're fired up. Give them something to do. Now, playing against that, not against it, but complementing that, is the longer term demonstration of value, right? Every communication that an organization has with a supporter or a donor affects whether that person is going to act when they are asked to act, right? So every social media post they see, every spokesperson they see in a web video or interviewed on TV or talking to an influencer, right? Every email, every text message they get from you. This is all going to affect their the idea of your organization or campaign that they have in their head. And people don't want to throw their money away, right? They want to feel like it's going to something that's going to make a difference. And so, over the long run, you show that you're making a difference. You give people advocacy actions to take, perhaps, but then you follow up with them to let them know that their work actually made a difference, right? But then in the short term, you may be emphasizing where the money is going to go, and we'll show some examples of that kind of thing. But I'm a big fan of campaigns that are raising for a specific thing. We're going to run, put up billboards in the state legislator's district, or if we can raise $50,000, we can support XYZ number of field teams this weekend, right? Explaining where the money goes, demonstrating the value both short term and long. But the other thing is you have to ask, right? And this is something that sometimes in the nonprofit world, historically, folks have been a little reluctant to do, right? It's almost unseemly to ask for money. Our issues should be so obviously great and wonderful that people will just spontaneously open their wallets. It doesn't really work that way. You have to ask. And then email. I remember being at a conference, 2005, I guess, and someone asked, I wasn't in the room, but people were talking about it later. Seth Godin, a digital marketing expert, was at the time an expert and still respected, I believe. But he was asked whether we would still be using email in the coming years, so from 2005 to 2010. And his answer was, well, it's still effective now, but I don't know if we'll be talking about it in a couple of years. Well, 20 years later, email is still the most powerful, consistently effective tool we have for digital fundraising, right? An ask delivered by email is going to raise a lot more money than an ask put on a Facebook page or put out over Twitter. Now, I'm not saying that you don't use the other channels. And I have to point out that text messaging, of course, as anyone who was a recipient of the barrage from Democratic campaigns and organizations this fall can attest, text fundraising is obviously very popular right now. We shall see if we manage to poison the well and text messaging stops being so effective. But we know that email excels at maintaining long-term connections with supporters. It's good for long-term education. And then that text message that you send may have, if you've cultivated people by email and social media, educated them, gotten them, shown them the work you're doing, when that text message comes, they may well be more primed to act. So let's talk a little more about what works. So institutional versus individual. And what do I mean here? If you're a nonprofit or a political campaign, you're probably going to focus on a few channels that work consistently well, right? You may find that Facebook actually works for you for fundraising. It does for some groups. If you're posting the right kind of content and making the right kind of appeal, something that really, that through testing probably you found works with your organization, right? But you're probably going to be focusing on email and maybe text messaging. If you're an individual person, an activist, or raising money for a cause you care about, you're going to use everything you use. You're going to text your friends, you're going to put it on Facebook, you might record a TikTok video, put it on Instagram, do all the things that you would do in your normal life, right? Activists are extremely good at figuring out very quickly how to take something they use in their lives and apply it to politics and advocacy. So just that distinction there. And one thing that can be very powerful is when an organization uses its institutional channels like email or SMS or social media and uses them to get your supporters active in every channel they got, right? So they can be ambassadors for your organization in their social circles. And this applies equally to advocacy, to communication these days. I think that in the current environment, one of the few things that's going to break through about the harm that the administration is doing to this country are the stories of people who are being harmed. And the more that individual people who don't like the way things are going, the more that they can share those through their own channels, I think it's one of the few things that's going to cut through the clutter. So the more that we as organizations and campaigns can get our supporters active on our behalf and on behalf of the causes we care about, I think the more effective all of our messaging and advocacy is going to be. So let's talk. Let me check it looks like there's nothing new in the chat. Just remember, if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. And I always learn a thing or two from these sessions too. So I really appreciate y'all jumping in when you can. So preparing the ground, right? So we're going to launch a big fundraising campaign. We're going to drive a lot of people to something, but we need to have that something. So normally we're going to be doing this with a website, right? Now, sometimes it might be a Facebook page or even a TikTok profile for an influencer. You may be driving people there to raise money for a cause, but if you're an institution, an organization, a campaign, most often you're going to have a website, right? And the website's important because it's where you can make your case. Right? You're not being filtered algorithmically. You're not having to adapt your content for, some platform's obscure rules. You control the presentation. And we'll look at a good example of that in a minute. But you also need some kind of mass communications tool. For most of us, that's a CRM, a constituent or customer relations management platform. In the advocacy space, this is everything from Action Network to Every Action, to others that suddenly escape my mind, but they will come back to me later. But these tools typically combine, a supporter database with mass emailing and sometimes mass texting functions, although I think the latter is relatively rare. Engaging networks is another good example. There's a platform that escaped me for a minute. And there are a ton of different vendors out there that have these systems that are designed specifically for politics and advocacy. But you're combining a database, mass email, some kind of fundraising connection. Now, if you're a political campaign, you might just be sending people to an Act Blue page. Although there was a worrisome story in the Times the other day about turmoil at Act Blue. Let's hope that gets resolved quickly for the sake of a lot of things I believe in. But you may well be using a fundraising module that's included with your mass email, mass communications supporter database. But this automates the process of people signing up, people leaving your list. The fundraising platform will be keeping records for you. So, when you've got to prepare for those audits that nonprofits have to do, you've got information handy. And of course, your fundraising team will be tapping into this as well. I'm happy to chat about different platforms if you guys want to do that offline. Then there are peer-to-peer tools. The most common, of course, are peer-to-peer texting tools. And they get around the limitation on blast texts that are in the mobile communications world in the US, right? Basically, one of your volunteers or one of your staff installs Hustle or another tool like that. And they're basically you give them a contact list, and they text those people one at a time by pressing a button over and over and over and over. So a single volunteer or staffer might text several hundred people in an hour, or an hour and a half. They've been very popular with campaigns. It has enabled massive text message blasts through the ether and directly to people's phones, to the point that it was getting pretty darn ridiculous last fall. So the upside of peer-to-peer tools is they make it easy to text people. The downside of peer-to-peer tools is they make it easy to text people. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And then there's blast texting. This is where someone has signed up for your organization's list via a short code or a link, and you're using one of the providers out there that allows you to send text in bulk en masse from a short code. So again, there are a bunch of providers out there that do this. I'd be happy to talk about it offline. It's an alternative to peer-to-peer. Sometimes you see groups using them side by side for different purposes. Okay, so let us double check to see. Nope, no comments yet. So we'll dive right in. So our website is our conversion hub, right? Now, this is the website for a Congress member who I'm sure you'll be shocked to find out is a doctor. Note the stethoscope. But he is, he's a Democratic Congress member from California. Notice the emphasis on the website. Get involved, volunteer, contribute now. The contribute now button in both places is red. You'll see a lot of red donation buttons because the human eye is very sensitive to red. The assumption, I think, is that it's the color of blood, so we're kind of programmed to notice it, right? But also the different ways that you can get involved here, right? Click get involved, click volunteer, but you can just join right away with an email and a zip. Now, they're going to ask you for more information. They're going to get your name and that kind of thing once you've clicked on the Join Us link and put your info in. But they're asking for as little as they can up front, right? The more information you ask from someone the moment they join your list, the less likely they are to do it, right? See a they're like, I don't want to do this. But if you get email, you can communicate with them. If you get zip, you know where they are. So that's the essential, and you can follow up or have a second screen that in your onboarding process that asks for more information, whatever it is. But notice that the contribute button is prominent. The list is easy to sign up for. Don't make people look for your donate button. I know it's common sense. I shouldn't have to say it, but you would be surprised, especially considering mobile devices, right? That the donate button may be very obvious on the desktop version of your website or the iPad version of your website. But when it shows up on an iPhone or an Android phone, that button may not be prominent anymore. So you do need to be testing. And these days, folks are more likely to see you on a cell phone than they are on a desktop or a laptop. So we need to be testing the different ways, how our information is presented as people are actually going to see it, not as we're going to see it in the office. Okay, so making the appeal. Now we're going to ask for money. So make it personal. Again, tugging at the heartstrings. And if you have information like name and such, you can have the messages personalized in most systems. However, sometimes the results can be kind of laughable. People put fake names in. Sometimes the system will default to the word friend if it doesn't have a name, but the way it gets used in a sentence can sound really weird. So if you're going to use like personal information in messages, be sure to test it on some nice guinea pigs and make sure it comes out okay. But you can also make it personal simply by telling stories, by connecting people with folks who are affected by your policies, connecting people with your staff, with your volunteers, with your activists, right? It's a good way to tell stories, but make it urgent, right? Explain why you have to act now. Stories from the field of volunteers. You can show the work as it's happening, explaining how you'll use the money, as I mentioned earlier, right? We're going to use this to fund an ad in this Congress member's district. We're going to use this to rent cars to drive people to the polls on election day. So the more that you can make the work concrete, I think the more likely someone is to see it as valuable. But of course, we'll talk about testing these different approaches as we go. Now, your typical fundraiser relies on fear and dire consequences. I'm exaggerating slightly, but the hair on fire emails do get a bit repetitive after a while. So I think the more we can mix it up and focus on the good we can do and the consequences if we don't do it, I think the better. But fear is a powerful, powerful motivator. And fear of a bad policy or a bad political decision or a bad office holder getting into office, that can pry money loose from people's wallets, right? But you have to ask, and again, you have to emote. You have to connect to people's emotions. Aw, right? Do something that makes them feel. You can make them think too, but make them feel. So now, when I talk about tailoring the appeal, right, there are different ways that you can do this. One is understanding, just in general, what does your audience care about, right? They have followed your organization or your campaign, which focuses on a particular set of issues. But then you can dig down even deeper. Like I've worked at multi-issue organizations. I worked at National Women's Law Center a dozen years ago. And they had reproductive rights, they had education in women's sports, they had social safety net, they had different buckets of issues. And we would sometimes tailor the fundraising appeals to different segments of that audience. Finding out, for instance, sending one appeal to people who had responded to an online action, tell Congress sort of action, responded to something about Social Security, but that would be different, and a different message would have gone out to people who responded to messaging about abortion rights. If someone had done both, well, we'd flip a coin perhaps. But you can just look at the kinds, even if you're not segmenting your audience like that, you can look at the different kinds of appeals that have worked in the past. And then, of course, as we'll talk about, testing can help. Trying different versions of a single message, but also trying different sort of framing of the issues, different issues entirely, and seeing which one people respond to in the moment. And again, we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. So let's make a plan. So what goes into a plan, right? Well, first off, our goals. And we say our goal is to recruit 1,000 new donors. In that case, we may not care as much about the amount that they give. Of course, we want them to give a good amount. But we may be happy with them donating $1 or two if that makes them a donor, because the hardest thing to do is to get someone to make that first donation. Once they've given once, they're a lot more likely to give again. I remember being in a presentation about micro-targeting and data analysis, years ago. And someone asked what, on the stage, one of the presenters is like, what do you think is the best predictor of whether someone is going to donate to you in the future? And it was whether they've donated to anybody in the past, right? So that first donation you can get someone to give to you is the most important. But then integration, right? We're doing digital fundraising, but how does it connect with the big donor work that your organization might be doing, calling up individual donors, right? We may want to exclude some people from, if they're going to be contacted through other means, we may not want to bug them with email. Even though we might bug them 6 months later with email, we don't want to bug them now. But also, how does your email stream or your text message stream fit with your social media, right? How are the different parts going to reinforce each other? You can, for instance, be uploading your email list to Facebook as a custom audience and target those folks with content, ads, basically, boost content to them that is going to mesh with your fundraising scheme or your email fundraising stream, and potentially, and this has been found to be true in some testing, running ads at people at the same time you're sending a fundraising email may help you raise more money from the fundraising email, and it may help you raise more than enough to cover the cost of the ads. And that's something I'm very happy to talk about offline. But you want to have your big picture messages, right? You also want to have, the message of each individual message that you're, each individual email or text that you're pre-planning, right? You want to have visuals. This is less important in emails now because since people are opening messages on phones, big pictures can actually get in the way. So you see a lot less imagery in fundraising emails than you used to. But the visuals may be very important for social media, right? And then video also, if you're if supporters on TikTok, you're trying to mobilize, right? You might put out a short video there. The visuals are more for the social media side than for the email or text side. Although there are vendors out there now that can compress and send a video in a text message or along with a text message. However, it is still more common to send a still image that somebody clicks on to go to YouTube or something. But you may have video that supports your fundraising campaign. And then the landing pages, which we're going to talk about a lot. The email or the text starts the process, right? The landing page seals the deal. And as we'll see, the schedule, the overarching schedule, the big ending, right? Because you're typically building towards something. Year end, for political campaigns, you often see, a build up to a debate or a build up to a quarterly reporting deadline, that kind of thing. Or you may be building up to a primary election or the election itself. So you want to have a big ending. And then the extras, right? This is the donor match. This is your giveaways. We're going to give you a mug. Here's public radio and public television for you, right? But merch is very powerful. And I will note that the Trump campaign raises a lot of money raised, and we shall see if they run again, but they raise a lot of money selling hats and t-shirts and coffee mugs and stuff, right? So, that's certainly not going to be a good fit for everyone, but these sort of extras are something to think about. Donor matches in particular, which we'll talk about. So let's check to see if we have any questions. Nothing yet so far. So narrative arcs. This is a story in several emails or texts building toward that last ask. And you commonly see this at things like year-end fundraising, right? Like if it's December, I may send 2 or 3 messages in the first half of the month, kind of setting the campaign up, talking about our victories, talking about our plans for the next year. But then the week between Christmas and New Year's, I might send 2 or 3 very short messages that, we've already done our education. Now we're just trying to get somebody to act in the moment, right? And there are, again, when you're building toward those big endings, like I talked about, that's another common time to have a narrative arc like this. And they can be powerful, right? The thing you have to remember, though, is that every message has to stand on its own, right? If your open rate, a typical open rate for nonprofits, the benchmarks these days are 15, 16, 18%. So not everyone is going to see every message. So they have to thread a bit of a needle here, right? An email or a social media post or a text, you want to have it potentially be part of this narrative arc, but it also has to be capable of standing on its own. That if that single piece of content is all someone sees, that it still gives the best chance of sparking an action or a donation. Okay, so we've been talking about email, right? So let's talk about what makes, and again, these are all rules of thumb. Circumstances can change tomorrow, but these are things that have tended to be, part of an effective message for a long time. If we were in person and I could, go back and forth like I like to do in trainings, I would ask, how much time do you think you should spend on the subject line? And, I usually get back, oh, 10%, da, da, da. I've heard people say you should spend three-quarters of your time on the subject line and the rest on all the other parts of the message. I doubt they were entirely serious, but the subject line and the first line or two of the email are the most important things by far. The subject line in particular, because that's what gets someone to open them. And Allison Egbert notes, I've spent quite a bit of time on the subject line and on the preview. You got to hook them. You are absolutely right. In things like Gmail, systems like Gmail, those first couple of lines or a dedicated preview pane is gonna show somebody more text than just the subject line. But this is the most important thing. And unfortunately, people tend, especially in policy focused organizations, they tend to focus on the words in the email more than, and the subject line sometimes an afterthought. Don't do that, right? And subject lines are very common subjects for A/B testing, as we'll discuss. So there's also the sender. Who's the message coming from? Sometimes people send from an institutional address, but more and more I see organizations putting a human face on it too. Hi, I'm the digital director. Hi, I'm I'm the head of outreach. I lead a field team in XYZ state. You want to have a consistent from email address, right? Otherwise, you can run into email deliverability problems. But the name of the sender can change, and it can also highlight a person. Again, you're trying to create this emotional bond. The visuals, again, you see less of them than you used to, but they may still be there. The intro line, the donation links, right? Make the donation links prominent. If someone has to hunt for the donate button, you have probably messed up. The signature of the sender, again, it's a little human touch. All the rest of the text, I have had to fight policy people so many times because they want to explain every nuance of an issue. But you don't generally have to do that. If these people have been, working with your organization or following your organization or getting your action alerts, they may well already know the nuances. And are those nuances going to make them give more money now? Probably not. An emotional connection might. So the backup text is important, but don't let the policy wonk editors gum it all up. Keep it simple, keep it emotional, keep it direct. And then the postscript. You see these a lot. I don't know if they work as well as they did maybe 10 years ago, but a lot of people will repeat the donation ask in a PS. It stands out a little bit from the page, it's close to the signature, and it does seem to, at least sometimes boost your response rate. So here is a message from Indivisible. They are, it was just, they're trying to, raise money. Now, I thought for a minute that this was from after the inauguration, but no, this is from when the election was still going on. So if you have a few dollars to spare to help us cast Trump and the extremist MAGA movement in the wasteland of history, please chip in here, right? The urgency is there. Trump rakes in a lot of money. He may be a twice impeached convicted felon, but you're explaining the dire consequences. Now, the execute our grassroots strategy to defeat Trump is not quite as concrete as it could be, but I think later in the message they were more they were more direct, more concrete about where the money was going to go. But this tries to catch your eye very quickly. You may not notice, when when they're talking about when he raked in the $53 million, but you'll see raked in nearly $53 million. So they're trying to give you that urgency. Here's a little bit older message from Mark Kelly, but noticing that note the fundraising deadline, right? This is one of these, we've set an arbitrary deadline. We've set a goal of 50,000 donations, only 1,000 left, right? This is making the goal attainable. Only 1,000 people. And note the suggested donation is $3. I'm not giving him any money. So they're just going to ask for the minimum amount to try to get me on the list as a donor so that they can hit me up for more tomorrow. But so they're creating urgency by basically creating I mean, it's a real deadline, it's the end of the month, but it's not like it's a deadline that exists out in the world. You know what I mean? So, but still trying to create that urgency. Now let's talk landing pages for a minute. Now, this is everyone's, I'm sure everyone on the call is a huge fan of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. But I picked this, this is a few years old, but I keep it because this landing page demonstrates the simplicity that you often see on landing pages, right? There aren't a lot of extraneous links. For all the NRSC logo at the top is probably linked, I don't remember, but there isn't anything taking you away from the landing page. And this would have followed, you would have gotten to this from an email or an ad that was focused on Scalia's replacement and Obama's nomination, right? So this message is echoing the theme of the paper, email, or ad that sent you here, and there are no distractions. People have found over the years that any other links other than the donate link can take people away from the page and they don't give money. So you'll see this kind of you can only do one thing sort of landing page quite often. Now here's another, so as few distractions as possible, echo your messaging. If you had a specific ask amount in the email, try to echo that ask. It can be a little harder if you're, sending different ask amounts to different people. But try to echo at least the array of amounts that might have been in the message. Include validation information. Now, if you're a Democratic campaign or you're using Act Blue, that sort of functions as validation. People are used to Act Blue, and let us hope it stays intact. But if you're a nonprofit, you might have the Charity Navigator graphic, the little bug they call it, or you might have the Better Business Bureau bug. Again, things to reassure people. It could also be, like I do a film quiz every day from the American Film Institute, and their website at different times has had a rotating scroll of people who have given money recently, right? Again, you're creating that sense that, oh, these people think this is valuable, so I feel a little better about giving money. And of course, make it easy. So let's go back in time again. This would be 10 years ago now. Tell Hillary you have her back before the first Democratic debate. And the reason I keep this one is because, doing my best thirsty Marco Rubio there, the reason I keep this one is because of the photo. So say you're with Hillary, join the official campaign. If you went to the landing page, this is what you get. Say you're with Hillary, add your name, email address, and zip only, right? This is a list building tool. They're going to hit you up for money after you give your name. Now, you could say that, it echoes a photo. You could say, well, maybe that was just their photo, right? Here's a Facebook post. Here's the photo. Well, this was their default landing page at the time, right? Again, just email address and zip and a red join us button, a red action button, and it echoes the red in her outfit there. But it is not the same photo as was on the ad or was on the landing page of the ad. They might have had 10 different ads running at the time with different photos, testing which ones were performing best, and each of those might have had its own landing page that again echoed the photo from the ad. So I just think this is a great example of the kind of continuity that you want to try to create between your ads or your emails and then the landing page and your text messages too, and the landing page people get to. So the question that comes up question that comes up all the time is, how do I know when I am sending too many messages? Well, people will let you know, right? If they stop opening your emails, you may be sending too many messages. If they start unsubscribing, you may be sending too many messages. If they start marking you as spam, guess what? You may be sending too many messages, right? So you want to watch your open, your action, and your unsubscribe rates like a hawk. Now, in the political campaign world, there is, unfortunately, to me, too much of a churn and burn kind of ethic. There are certain vendors, I shall not name, who specialize in short term donation volume, not long term relationship building, right? They can afford to do that because if they lose, the campaigns can afford to do that because if they lose, they're done, right? And if they win, well, they can burn out people now because they're not going to run again for 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, right? Nonprofits don't really have that luxury. If we burn our list out, that list is very hard to replenish, right? But I will say that a list is constantly churning, of course, right? We have to be growing our list all the time just to keep it the same size because people switch email addresses and we lose them. They switch interests and they unsubscribe. But the thing you do not want them doing is marking you as spam because that can keep the rest of your messages from reaching people who want to receive them, right? The big email service providers, the Gmails, the Yahoo's, AOL, if people are still on AOL, these they track mass senders, and everyone gets a grade, everyone gets a score. And if people aren't opening your messages or they're marking you as spam, it counts against you. And I have worked with an organization that had ended up in spam jail, and it is a real pain to get out of, right? So keep an eye out. So someone says, so we should all subscribe to Republican emails lists and mark them as spam. Under no circumstances would I possibly recommend such an underhanded trick. Why, how dare you? To be honest, I did not send, after I did my last training where I had the troll invasion, I did not drop those people into my email contact list. Anyone from that training, because I didn't know which email addresses were the bad ones. I did not want to send an email to those people from my system because the trolls might have marked it as spam. Instead, I only sent the follow-up messages through Eventbrite, which is very frustrating. So I was worried enough about one or two spam flags to not mass message those folks. So you folks are very well behaved by contrast and would never do such a rude thing as marking something as spam, even to the most awful people on the other side. Ahem. All right. So we're getting toward the home stretch here. I very, very much appreciate y'all being here and appreciate your patience. So peer-to-peer texting, right? Again, if you had a cell phone and you were on any kind of Democratic list, and a lot of times, even if you weren't, you might have been being blasted with fundraising messages last fall. It got to the point that it is absolutely ridiculous, right? But as we talked about earlier, peer-to-peer texting lets us get around the limitations on blast texting, broadcast texting, by you or your staff or your volunteers install an app that allows you to text a whole lot of people on a list the same message simply by clicking send over and over and over. Hustle was the first one that really got a lot of attention. They were working with Bernie back in 2016. I think they may have come out of the Bernie campaign, but I could be wrong. It's been a long time. But now it's all over the place. So people use it for direct ask, right? But I will say that there are more creative uses too. One, you can use it to manage volunteers, manage field organizers, field teams. It allows a single organizer to blast text a whole lot of people in a short period of time. But there's an activist named DeRay McKesson, very sharp guy. I've been on panels with a couple of times. And when he was running for mayor of Baltimore, a few years ago, he was using Hustle, I think, to stay in touch with all of his donors, right? He would, maybe at this point he had a few hundred donors. He would personally, on his own phone, use the peer-to-peer app to text all of his donors in a short time, And that would end up starting conversations with the donors, right? So he was actually using it to deepen his relationship with his donors, right? So, yeah, you could blast a text out there, but you could also use it in more subtle and perhaps more long-term beneficial, long-term-ish beneficially, however it works, something that'll work out for you in the long run too. The requirement, of course, is cell phone numbers. And if you were doing Democratic voter outreach in the fall, you may have been using the van, another piece of Democratic technology which appears to be running into trouble. I think we need to get away from these single points of failure, folks, as a movement. But the requirement is you got to have the cell phone numbers. So if you're using the van, I was doing it in Michigan, working with the Michigan Democratic Party on a voter outreach project. So we were exporting lists from Van of people that met our, target criteria. Reliable Democrats, uh, with a cell phone and with a cell number and at least a reasonable chance of turning out to vote, right? But the problem is that they only had cell numbers in the van for a fraction of those people. And guess what? Everybody who's using the van was texting those people. A similar problem happens if you try to target uh, an exported list of email addresses, right? If you're going to try to target that as a custom audience on Facebook, you're probably only going to match a fraction of those people. And everyone uploading the same list is going to match the same people. So I think there's a good chance that things like van exports have ended up with us hitting like lots of different organizations, hitting the same people repeatedly and missing a whole lot of other people. So that's just something to think about long term. And then, of course, the other long term problem, as we have discussed, is the sheer volume of text messages that go out, that we are risking burning out our donors forever. I do not know a good solution because of all these different organizations, in many cases, are prohibited from working together, collaborating by federal or state election laws. But we got to do something, or we're going to poison the well. Donor match programs, which we've touched on, obviously you get validation from it. This person, this anonymous donor out there is willing to match my gift. Well, my gift must be worth something, and I'll get more bang for my buck. But the question is it real, right? Like the Trump campaign and some of the Republican groups love to send out these 10x matches, 10 times. Really? I have seen studies that suggest that a triple or a quadruple or a quintuple match doesn't really work any better than a simple match. And one reason I suspect is that people don't know if it's real. One thing you'll see often is an organization that has a few big donors. They'll get a donor who was already going to get money and ask if they can, or give money and ask if they can allocate it to the donor match. So at least then it is real, but that match isn't really additional money. So just something to keep in mind. Don't make it too unrealistic. Small dollar programs, people often ask about this. Just bear in mind that a good response rate to a fundraising email is 1/10 of 1%, maybe 0.2%. So one or two people out of 1,000, right? So if you have a 5,000 person list, it's going to be tough to raise very much money from a small dollar program, right? You've got to expand that base. So for many organizations, it simply doesn't make sense. Now, getting people to donate, I don't think it ever hurts. It certainly deepens their connection to your organization. They are literally invested, right? But then can you, if you have an activist list, but they don't really give a lot of money or anything, can you move them up the ladder of engagement? This is an example from here too. So someone would have signed a petition on care2.org, right? So this is the thank you screen they would get from Defenders of Wildlife there. So thank you for taking action to save red wolves. So they just, sent a comment to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Now we're hitting them with a donation ask. So this is a moment where they know they already care about this issue. and they're primed to act. So can you get them to move up the ladder of engagement to a more valuable for your organization tier? Just ways to think about that. How can you upsell people in a way that isn't offensive or insulting to them, right? And I think this does it pretty dramatically. So social media fundraising, we've talked about a little bit. It is complicated. You definitely can and should be posting appeals. You can also try to mobilize supporters to fundraise on your behalf. Facebook, if you're set up to get donations on Facebook, people will, they used to ask people to donate. People would run campaigns on their birthdays, that kind of thing. I haven't seen, more recent numbers about how well that sort of thing can work. But, way back in '08, the Obama campaign, they did this kind of peer-to-peer fundraising. They got, the supporters to hit up their friends for cash. I think out of $1 billion that they raised, maybe they raised 40 or 50 million through the peer-to-peer like that. But every one of those people who gave was then a target for future fundraising. So if you can get supporters out there working on your behalf, it may expand your circles. Similar if you can get influencers. I know a friend of mine who works with a uh, 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 Asian American Pacific Islander group. They found a Twitch streamer who was very much in line with the work they were doing, and he live streamed his video gaming for I think 24 hours and raised like $100,000, right, for that organization. Another one would be back in 2017 when Trump first came into office, had the Muslim travel ban. A bunch of celebrities, kind of on their own, started pointing to the ACLU, and the ACLU suddenly raised more money in a few days than it had raised in a few years. So, if you can get people working on your behalf, they can sometimes, if it catches fire, it can really pay off. And this is why you want that website working before you need it, right? So I mentioned earlier social media plus email plus texting. There have been studies done over the years. You can send a fundraising appeal. Um, just a moment. I've got this question, good question there, but I want to get through this quick before we run out of time. You can send an email, run Facebook ads at the same time, Facebook, Instagram ads aimed at the same people, uploaded as a custom audience, or you can be sending a text message there. But the idea is that the social media post reminds them of the email and vice versa, so that when they get the email or the text, they are more primed to act. And it had, your mileage may vary as always, but it has been shown to work in the past. So list segmentation, we've already touched on some. A common way in fundraising is if you've got non-donors, you send them a $3 ask or a $5 ask. If someone's given you $10, you ask them for 20. If someone's given you $50, you ask them for 65, 70, 75, right? You don't want to ask people for less than they've given in the past, but you don't want to ask a small donor for $1,000 because it's just a turnoff. So can you segment your list based on past donations, or donor status period? And as we talked about earlier, you can also segment based on people's behavior, on the interest that they've shown, what they've responded to in the past, or basic demographics, things like location, things like you may be tailoring an ask to people in a given state or region, right? So again, all of these things can be tested, right? Now, the most common thing we test is the subject line, because again, you have an obvious measure whether people open the message or not, right? Now, we're not all mad scientists like Dr. Frankenstein there, but we can do a basic test. And this is a schematic of a website test, right? They're testing whether green or orange worked better. So you'd have a random sample. One half of them, in this case, get shown one version, one half get shown another version, and then you measure the difference between the two, if any. And you probably repeat the test more than once, right? Because something can also always be a statistical fluke. But this is the basic idea. You have a hypothesis. I think that changing the color will make a difference in the conversion rate. And then you set up a test to isolate that variable. But sometimes you may have a full package that you're testing, right? You have an email with different text, different images, and you're not going to try to pick apart the not going to try to pick apart the the individual variables. You just want to know, does message A do better or does message B do better? And in this moment, knowing that 6 weeks from now the results might be different, right? So everything changes in this field. It keeps it fresh. So last few implementation tips: subject line: beware the policy wonk editor's pin. Right? Don't let them kludge up your messages. Prep visuals well in advance, because you don't want to be scrambling for a good photo for social media when you should have had that post out 10 minutes ago. And then be prepared to pivot, right? You can have all the narrative arcs, all the content ready in advance. But if the world changes suddenly and presents you with either an opportunity or a threat, you want to be ready to act and to give other people, to give your supporters and potential supporters something to act on. So thank you very, very much. I hope this has been helpful. We have some questions that I'm going to get to now. If you put your donation from Anne, if you put your donation links out there on wide circulating social media, controls mess with your donation link? That's a good question. I don't know how they would. It is, they could mess with your post, right? They could report your post. I have known people who have run into that problem of trolls basically seeing your social media content and marking it as inappropriate or spam or something like that. Um, uh, but I don't think they can really mess with your donation link other than through a distributed denial of service attack, where they're basically attacking your web hoster, trying to overwhelm it. I wouldn't worry too much about links circulating widely on social media. Now, any advice on timing of email sends? Oh man, this is a question that has been coming up forever and ever. There used to be various rules of thumb, like Tuesday afternoon was good. I think it's going to depend on your list, right? Like everyone in a time zone. If like I work with an organization that has it mobilizes commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen and charter boat captains and fishmongers, people like that, around marine conservation. They've got people in Alaska, they've got people on the east coast of the US. And as Talia notes, the timing is a good thing to test, right? I think an email sent out in the middle of the night is less likely to work generally, but you might try it and see, right? I think with the timing, I would just try to keep an eye on messages that perform particularly well or particularly poorly, and see if you can see a reason why. And if you see something consistent like the when you send, right? Now, like, Friday afternoon may normally be a bad time to send, right? Because people are trying to get out of the office, etc. But news breaks that people want to respond to, and you can give them a thing to do, right? That Friday afternoon may be the perfect time to send. But way back in '08, after Sarah Palin gave her convention speech where she trashed community organizers as a concept and a group. The Obama campaign had an email out, by 11 o'clock or midnight that did incredibly well. It ended up being at that point, the biggest day for digital fundraising of all time, been surpassed by now. And admittedly, people were giving money to the campaign. They were spontaneously going to the website well before the email went out. But they didn't wait to send it the next day. They got it out while people were fired up and still awake. So I would not, generally send a fundraising email in the middle of the night. You may have good results on weekends. You may not. You may try testing it. I think it really just depends on your list and your circumstances. But considering how often, emails are read on cell phones these days rather than on desktops and laptops, it's hard for me to say how much the old rules of timing still apply. So I think you should, if you're interested in trying different options, you might do an A/B test, break your list into two segments and send at different times and see what happens. So it's a very good question, though. Okay, so that's the last question for now. I want to thank all of y'all for being here. I really appreciate it. And I encourage you to go to Substack. I have links to 3 new trainings up there. And on the most recent post, it includes links to all 3 of the new trainings, 2 on digital advertising and 1 on ethical and effective list building. And thank you all for the questions. Very good conversation. And look for the link to this recording, which I encourage you to share with folks, right? Don't hide my light under a bushel, baby. Let's let it shine. Anyone you think might benefit, please feel free to share. Thank you very much.